Every morning, millions of people over 60 step on a scale, see the same number, and wonder what they're doing wrong. You have tried cutting portions, you have tracked your food, you have passed on bread, passed on dessert. Some of you did this for months, and the belly is still there, possibly larger than it was 3 years ago. I want to tell you something directly. Nothing is wrong with you. Your body is not broken. The model you have been given is broken. Counting calories after 60 is like trying to fix a damaged engine by measuring how much fuel you pour in. The fuel amount is not the issue. The engine is the issue. And until you address the engine, nothing changes, regardless of how carefully you count. Today, I am going to show you why the calorie model fails in an aging body, what is actually driving fat accumulation after 60 at the physiological level, and 5 specific biological levers you can pull immediately with food, no expensive intervention, starting this week. Subscribe and hit like right now. We are pushing toward 100,000 subscribers, and this channel cannot grow without you. Here is something worth knowing before we go further. The healthcare system is not built to keep you well. It is built to keep you coming back. There is no billing code for the conversation we're about to have because there is no revenue in telling someone they can change their biology with 8 foods from a grocery store. What you are about to hear, nobody at your next appointment is going to volunteer. Subscribe, hit like, and let's get into it. Let's start with exactly what is happening inside your body when the standard weight loss approach stops working. Because the failure is not random, it is predictable and it is physiological. The calorie model, eat less, burn more, was built on thermodynamics. It is not completely wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete once the body has passed through the biological changes that accumulate after 60. 3 specific shifts make the calorie equation almost irrelevant in the context of aging. The first is insulin resistance. Insulin is the hormone that moves glucose, blood sugar, from your bloodstream into your cells to be used as energy. After 60, particularly in people who have spent decades consuming processed foods, insulin resistance becomes nearly universal. Cells have stopped responding efficiently to insulin signal. And here is the consequence. When cells resist insulin, the pancreas compensates by producing more of it. Insulin levels become chronically elevated. Elevated insulin is the primary biochemical signal for fat storage. The switch is stuck. You can reduce your calorie intake by 300 calories a day, and your insulin will still be instructing your fat cells to expand. Eating less does not fix this. Eating differently does. The second shift is sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle tissue. After 30, the body loses roughly 3 to 5% of its muscle mass every decade. By 60, many people have lost a substantial portion of the body's primary fat-burning organ. Muscle burns calories at rest, around the clock. Less muscle means a slower resting metabolic rate. Here is the trap. When you cut calories without prioritizing protein, your body responds by breaking down muscle for fuel. The scale moves, but the weight lost is largely lean tissue, not fat. Metabolism slows further. When you return to normal eating, which all humans eventually do, fat returns faster than before because the metabolic engine is now smaller. Almost every calorie restriction approach leaves people in a worse metabolic position than when they started. The third shift is a change in the gut microbiome, roughly 38 trillion bacteria that live in your digestive tract and directly influence how your body processes every meal. 2 dominant bacterial families are relevant: firmicutes and bacteroidetes. Research from Washington University published in Nature has shown that people with a higher ratio of firmicutes to bacteroidetes extract more calories from identical amounts of food. As we age, that ratio drifts toward more firmicutes. Your gut becomes more efficient at pulling energy from food and converting it to stored fat. You can eat the same meal as someone 30 years younger and store more of it. Not because of willpower, because of bacterial composition. Cutting calories does not fix this. Eating differently does. Now let's get into the specific mechanisms driving fat accumulation after 60. I want to start with one that almost nobody connects to this problem. What does visceral fat, the fat around your organs, have to do with your blood vessels? I am going to explain this, and I think you will find it genuinely surprising. Visceral fat is not passive storage. It is biologically active. Unlike subcutaneous fat, the fat you can pinch under the skin, visceral fat behaves like an endocrine organ. It produces inflammatory cytokines, specifically TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, that circulate in the bloodstream and directly impair insulin receptor sensitivity. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Visceral fat drives insulin resistance, which drives more fat storage, which produces more visceral fat. But here is what makes visceral fat different from all other fat. It grows its own blood supply through a process called angiogenesis, the formation of new blood vessels. Visceral fat recruits capillary networks that deliver nutrients directly to the expanding tissue. This is driven by a signaling protein called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. The fat fat is actively building infrastructure to support its own growth. This is why visceral fat is so much harder to address than surface level fat, and why it requires a specific targeted approach. The good news, not the marketing kind, is that angiogenesis is a targetable process. Specific food compounds inhibit VEGF and can cut off the blood supply. Visceral fat depends on to expand. We will come back to this. The second mechanism influences fat metabolism just as powerfully as insulin, possibly more so in women over 60. Almost no one discusses it in this context. It is the gut microbiome, and its effect is more direct than most people understand. Your gut bacteria do not just influence digestion. They produce metabolic byproducts, most importantly short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, that travel to the liver and actively regulate fat oxidation pathways. Butyrate directly activates fat-burning processes in hepatic cells, liver cells, and reduces inflammatory signaling in fat cells. When your microbiome produces adequate butyrate, your liver is primed to burn fat efficiently. When it does not, that signal is absent. Research published in Nature documented that people with a higher ratio of firmicutes to Bacteroides extract measurably more calories from identical meals. After 60, that ratio consistently shifts toward firmicutes. Two people eating the same dinner, one over 60, one younger with a more balanced gut, will store genuinely different amounts of that meal as fat. That is documented physiology, not speculation. The third mechanism is chronic low-grade inflammation. After 60, particularly in people who have spent decades eating refined seed oils, ultra-processed foods, and minimal fiber, a condition called systemic inflammation becomes persistent. This is not the acute inflammation of an injury. This is a quiet background activation of the immune system that registers no pain, produces no redness, but drives continuous dysregulation of insulin signaling, satiety hormones, and fat cell behavior. Elevated TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, the same cytokines produced by visceral fat, suppress the activity of leptin receptors in the brain. Leptin is the hormone produced by fat cells that signals satiety to the hypothalamus. When leptin receptors are chronically suppressed by inflammation, your brain never gets the signal that you have eaten enough. Hunger persists beyond what your caloric needs actually require, and the more you eat, the more fat you accumulate, the more inflammation you produce. This is not a failure of willpower. It is a biochemical loop, and it has a specific entry point, the food that feeds or suppresses that inflammatory cascade. The fourth mechanism is one almost every person over 60 is affected by, yet rarely identifies as relevant to weight: the thermic cost of protein. The thermic effect of food refers to the energy your body expends to digest, absorb, and metabolize what you eat. Carbohydrates require approximately 5 to 10% of their caloric value to process. Fat requires 0 to 3%. Protein requires 20 to 30%. For every 100 calories of protein consumed, your body burns 20 to 30 calories in digestion alone. After 60, protein intake tends to decline, reduced appetite, less activity, the assumption that eating less meat is inherently healthier. When protein drops, the thermic burn drops, and the body loses its primary signal for preserving muscle tissue. Less muscle, slower metabolism, more fat stored. The compounding effect over years is significant. This is a 5-lever protocol, 5 biological pathways, each targetable with food. Each of the 8 foods activates one or more of these levers. You do not need all 8 every day. You need a consistent pattern across the week. The 5 levers: insulin sensitivity, satiety signaling, thermogenic activation, microbiome rebalancing, and angiogenic suppression. These are the actual controls of your body's fat storage system. They respond to food quality, not food quantity. Food 1, eggs, 2 to 3 whole eggs, 3 to 5 days per week. Eggs are rich in choline, a nutrient that improves insulin receptor signaling at the cellular level. Studies have shown that people who eat eggs for breakfast have significantly lower post-meal insulin responses compared to those eating a carbohydrate equivalent breakfast of equal calories. That is lever 1. Eggs also provide a complete amino acid profile, which strongly activates GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, the satiety hormone that signals fullness to the brain. Multiple randomized trials have documented that people eating eggs for breakfast consume measurably fewer calories over the following 24 to 36 hours. Not because they restricted themselves, but because their satiety signaling was working. That is lever 2. And protein carries the highest thermic cost of any macronutrient, 20 to 30 calories burned in digestion per 100 consumed. That is lever 3. The yolk is where the choline lives. Do not discard it. Food 2. Extra virgin olive oil, cold-pressed high polyphenol, the darker and more peppery the flavor, the higher the polyphenol content. Oleic acid, the primary fat, activates PPR alpha in the liver, shifting cellular metabolism from fat storage to fat oxidation mode and reducing fasting insulin levels. That is lever 1. The compound of particular significance is oleocanthal. It inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes targeted by ibuprofen, COX1 and COX2, and significantly reduces VEGF activity, cutting off the signal that visceral fat uses to build its blood supply. That is lever 5. The pre-dimed trial, one of the largest nutritional studies conducted with over 7,000 participants, found that daily consumption of extra virgin olive oil was associated with significantly reduced central adiposity and lower inflammatory markers, including in adults over 65. 2 tablespoons daily is the evidence-based dose. Food 3, wild salmon, among the most concentrated dietary sources of EPA and DHA, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids with the most direct biological activity in the human body. EPA and DHA activate PPAR-gamma, a nuclear receptor central to insulin sensitivity. When activated, fat tissue becomes more responsive to insulin signals, meaning stored fat is more readily mobilized for energy. That is lever 1. Omega-3 also strongly activates satiety hormones, particularly peptide YY and GLP-1, producing a significantly longer satiety window than a calorie equivalent meal built on refined carbohydrates. That is lever 2. And omega-3 fatty acids selectively feed lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, the gut bacteria most associated with lower visceral fat mass. That is lever 4. 2 to 3 servings per week. Canned wild salmon is nutritionally equivalent to fresh and considerably more accessible. Food 4, lentils and beans, black beans, chickpeas, kidney beans, lentils. If there is one food category people over 60 are dramatically under-consuming, it is this one. Lentils and beans are rich in resistant starch, a fiber that human digestive enzymes cannot break down. It travels to the colon intact, where beneficial gut bacteria ferment it into butyrate, the short-chain fatty acid that activates hepatic fat oxidation, reduces gut permeability, and suppresses inflammatory signaling in fat cells. That is lever 4. Resistant starch also dramatically slows gastric emptying, producing a prolonged satiety signal lasting 4 to 6 hours after a meal. That is lever 2. 1 cup of cooked lentils provides 18 grams of plant protein, 15 grams of fiber, approximately 230 calories, half a cup to 1 cup 3 or more times per week. Canned beans, rinsed to reduce sodium, work perfectly. Food 5, green tea and matcha. Green tea contains a catechin called EGCG, epicalocatechin gallate, that works on 2 levers simultaneously. EGCG activates thermogenesis in brown adipose tissue, brown fat, a specialized tissue that burns energy as heat rather than storing it. Brown fat activity declines with age. EGCG reactivates it. Studies measuring resting metabolic rate have shown that consistent green tea consumption increases fat oxidation by approximately 8 to 12% without any change in diet or exercise volume. That is lever 3. EGCG is also among the most studied natural inhibitors of VEGF. Multiple clinical trials have documented that it reduces visceral fat area independent of total body weight change. That is lever 5. 2 to 4 cups of brewed green tea daily, or 1 cup of matcha, which delivers roughly 10 times the EGCG of standard brewed tea. Food 6, full-fat Greek yogurt, full-fat, not low-fat, not fat-free. The short and medium-chain saturated fatty acids in full-fat dairy directly activate satiety hormones in the small intestine. When those fatty acids are removed, as they are in low-fat versions, the satiety signal is significantly weaker. You eat the same food, feel less satisfied, and compensate by eating more within 2 to 3 hours. Despite having more calories on paper, full-fat Greek yogurt consistently leads to lower total intake across the day. That is lever 2. It is also among the most accessible sources of live probiotic cultures, specifically Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidobacterium, associated with lower visceral fat mass. That is lever 4. 3/4 to 1 cup daily. Plain, unsweetened. Food 7, broccoli and cruciferous vegetables, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, cabbage. The mechanism comes from sulforaphane, released when these vegetables are chopped or chewed, and an enzyme called myrosinase activates. Sulforaphane activates NR NRF2, the master regulator of the body's antioxidant and cellular defense systems. Among NRF2's downstream effects, increased insulin receptor sensitivity on muscle and liver cells, lower baseline insulin, more time in fat burning mode, that is lever 1. Sulforaphane also activates thermogenic pathways in brown fat, stimulating uncoupling proteins that increase heat production and fat oxidation. That is lever 3. 1 to 2 cups, lightly steamed or roasted, 3 to 5 times per week. Let chopped broccoli rest 5 minutes before cooking. It increases sulforaphane yield significantly. Food 8. Walnuts, a randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of Nutrition, tracked gut microbiome composition and metabolic markers in adults consuming walnuts daily versus controls. The walnut group showed significant increases in lactobacillus species, a decrease in the Firmicutes to bacteroidetes ratio, and higher levels of butyrate-producing bacteria. That is lever 4. Walnuts also activate a prolonged satiety response through their specific combination of fiber, protein, and fat, 1 ounce per day, stored in the refrigerator to preserve the omega-3 content. Here is the week-by-week structure. Week 1, preparation, 3 removals. First, replace all ultra-processed seed oils, canola, soybean, corn, cottonseed, with extra virgin olive oil for low to medium heat and avocado oil for high heat. These oils are loaded with omega-6 linoleic acid, which at typical Western diet levels drives the chronic inflammatory cascade, ending in elevated TNF-alpha and interleukin-6. All 5 levers, wrong direction. Second, replace artificially sweetened beverages. Research published in Nature by Sewers and colleagues documented that sucralose, aspartame, and saccharin significantly altered gut microbiome composition in ways that promote glucose intolerance and fat storage. Third, replace your current breakfast with 2 eggs and olive oil and a handful of berries. 1 swap, significant biological impact. Week 2, activation, the full pattern, protein and fat first at breakfast, fiber and fat at lunch, anti-inflammatory foods at dinner. A standard day, breakfast, 2 eggs and olive oil, half a cup of berries, 1 cup of green tea. Levers 1, 2, and 3 before 9 in the morning. Lunch, dark leafy greens, half a cup of lentils, canned wild salmon, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and lemon. Levers 1, 2, and 4. Dinner, salmon or chicken, roasted cruciferous vegetables and olive oil, a small serving of Greek yogurt. Levers 1, 3, and 4. Week 3, observation. Watch for specific signals before you look at the scale. Morning and afternoon hunger decreases. You think about food less. Mid-afternoon energy stabilizes instead of dropping. These are measurable physiological changes. Improving GLP, 1 activity, stabilizing glucose, lower post-meal insulin response, week 4 and beyond, consolidation. Over 8 to 12 weeks of consistent adherence, waist circumference begins to change. Not because you starved yourself or tracked a single calorie, because you changed the signals, your body was not broken. Here is something worth considering before we move to the final section. The degree to which insulin resistance contributes to fat accumulation changes significantly with age. After 50, insulin resistance begins to accelerate, driven by both muscle loss and dietary history. After 65, the interaction between insulin resistance and microbiome composition creates compounding effects that make the standard dietary advice not just ineffective, but potentially counterproductive. How old are you? Write it in the comments. I want to understand the age profile of this audience so I can build future content calibrated precisely to your risk profile and your physiology. That number genuinely affects which of the 5 levers I prioritize covering next. Here is the complete picture. 3 biological mechanisms drive fat accumulation after 60. Insulin resistance, locking the body in storage mode, sarcopenia reducing resting metabolic rate, and microbiome imbalance increasing caloric extraction from every meal. None respond to eating less. All respond to eating differently. 5 biological levers control fat storage and fat burning: insulin sensitivity, satiety signaling, thermogenic activation, microbiome rebalancing, and angiogenic suppression of visceral fat. 8 foods activate them: eggs, extra virgin olive oil, wild salmon, lentils and beans, green tea or matcha, full-fat Greek yogurt, cruciferous vegetables, and walnuts. 3 swaps to start tomorrow. Replace your current breakfast with eggs and olive oil. Replace any seed oils with extra virgin olive oil. Replace artificially sweetened drinks with green tea or sparkling water. If that still feels like too much, begin with the oils. That single change removes the primary driver of the chronic inflammatory cascade, underlying insulin resistance, suppressed satiety, and visceral fat expansion. 1 change, measurable impact. These work as a system. The cost is negligible. The biology is in your favor. 1 clinical note before we close. If you have experienced unexplained sustained rapid weight loss, not difficulty losing weight, but unexpected loss of more than 10 pounds in under 2 months without dietary change. That requires direct medical evaluation, not a protocol. If you have a history of pancreatitis, gallbladder disease, or active kidney disease, the high-fat foods discussed today, olive oil, eggs, full-fat dairy, need discussing with your physician before implementation. Everything covered today supports your body's own biological function. It does not replace clinical evaluation when specific symptoms require it. First, do no harm. The best intervention is sometimes the one that turns out to have been unnecessary. Nobody in a clinical setting is going to walk you through this at a standard appointment. There is no billing code for explaining the gut microbiome's role in fat storage, or the VEGF pathway that allows visceral fat to build its own blood supply, or why the oil you cook with may be the single largest driver of the insulin resistance, keeping you locked in fat storage mode. There is no financial incentive in that conversation. That is a fact of how the system is structured, not a criticism of the people working within it. I have spent many years in practice watching what happens when people are given the wrong answer to the right question, and watching what changes when they finally get the right one. Subscribe and hit like. Help build something that actually serves you. Your health is not a profit center here. It is the whole point